Hi, this is Marilyn Woodruff with At Knits and Designs, and I'm here today to walk you through some of the stitch patterns in the daisy chain socks. And there's only a couple of things that we need to walk through in this one. The first one is the cast on. I've called for an Estonian cast on, but feel free to use any cast on of your choice as long as it's a stretchy cast on for cuff down socks. I like the Estonian cast on because it's very quick to work. It's very similar to the long tail cast on, but it adds some additional stretch without it flaring out. So there's still support around the leg, so you don't have to add any additional elastic or anything, but it's stretchy enough that it allows your foot to go through the sock. The Estonian cast on works a lot like long tail, but you can see it makes these groupings of 2 stitches on your needle when you work it. And that's what gives us all of this extra stretch that we're looking for in the cuff. So to start an Estonian cast on, you're going to start it just exactly as if it was a long tail cast on, because the first stitch in each one of these 2 groupings is a long tail stitch. So I'm going to hold it just like I'm doing a long tail cast on and do 1 long tail cast on stitch. To do the Estonian, I'm going to move this thumb, and that's the only difference. So I'm holding a long tail cast on right now. I'm going to remove my thumb and I'm going to put it on the other side of the yarn. So again, here's long tail where my thumb is inside. Now I'm going to put my thumb on the opposite side. And then when I work this Estonian cast on, I'm just going to put my needle into this back loop, around and through. And so for every one of these 2 stitch groupings, I'm going to do 1 long tail stitch, and then I'm going to move my thumb to the inside, and then I'm going to do 1 Estonian stitch. And you can see it makes that cute little bump right here that sets us off in our groups of 2. So I will just do these a few times. So long tail, move my thumb to the inside, Estonian, long tail, oops, get around there. So long tail, Estonian, long tail, Estonian. And you'll just work that until you have the number of stitches on your needles that you're looking for. All right, now let's talk about the daisy chain stitches. So these are the stitches that you'll be making with the assigned pooling color. And you'll see that it's just a string of the exact same stitch over and over. And basically this row goes 4 stitches and then a little extra. And I chose a yarn that the actual pooling section of the yarn is about 10 inches long. And so I can fit approximately 4 of these stitches together, and it always ends with this little green bit. And because of that, I thought it would be really cool that at the end of every one of these, you can see I just keep knitting, and so that makes them look like they have a little tail. And you can just see as I work through, they all have that green bit at the end. And I was able to work 4 stitches in a row. You may only be able to work 3, you may be able to work 5. The important thing is that you're either consistent or you have a rule that, when you're going to work 3 versus when you're going to work 4. One thing to note, on the bottom of the sock, we do not work the stitches. So you see here's the top of the sock on the instep. On the bottom of the sock, you don't want to walk on those. So we're just knitting normally, ignoring that assigned pooling color. I found with this particular yarn, I need to work 1 stitch into the color. So there's my 1 stitch. And now I'm going to work in groups of 3. Into 3 stitches, I'm going to knit yarn over knit. Always into 3. So I'm going to leave 3 on the needle, knit, yarn over, knit. And you'll see it makes this little, looks like a cluster on the needle, but these are 3 individual stitches now. Once more, I'll just go into the next 3 and I'll knit 3 together. Oops. Knit 3 together. turn over, knit 3 together. And I will just do that going along 3 by 3 by 3 until I run out of yarn or until I get to the point where I want to make the tail. Now these stitches, the next time I come to them, I will knit them as individual stitches. So you can see they kind of want to group together. But when I come around on the next round, this is stitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So do not knit them together again. You will have sometimes where on the sock you'll be knitting stitches on top of them. So this was the first group, and this was the second group, and this was the third group. If there's a couple of rows in between, it makes it a little bit easier, but you don't necessarily have to have those rows in between. Like here, I had to put one row right on top of the next, and that worked out just fine. It does get a little bit tight, so just be aware if you're working multiple rows right immediately on top of each other, that second row could be just a little bit tight, and you might have to fiddle with it just a little bit, but it will absolutely work. The one thing that I would caution is if you are at the beginning or ending of round, you have to ignore my little marker over here. If you're at the beginning or ending of a round, it doesn't much matter when you're in the leg. So you can just work it around. When you're coming into the foot or in the gusset, I would always make sure that I am not working an assigned pooling stitch on the first stitch or the last stitch of the round. So you can see here, I worked one, and I had some left over as I was coming through, and so I just let it roll straight into that stitch. Similarly, over here you can see where I've had to do the same so that I'm not stepping on one of these cluster stitches when I walk with these socks on. Congratulations on finishing your sock. Now let's talk about grafting the toe. So to start grafting the toe, I always put the final stitches on 2 DPNs. That just makes it easy to control. And you should have the same amount of stitches on both the front and the back needles. And we're going to use a Kitchener stitch, but I really like Patty Lyon's suggestion to not do the setup rounds on the Kitchener stitch. And the reason for that is when you do the setup rounds, yes, you get complete stitches on this first and this last stitch, but you also get little ears that hang off of the ends of your toe, which is not comfortable in your shoe, and you're not really able to weave those in. So we're going to do this without the setup rounds, and that's going to eliminate those little ears, and you'll have a nice rounded end on either end of your toe. So we cut the yarn and just, I use a little bent tip tapestry needle. You can use any kind of tapestry needle, but I find for Kitchener stitch, this makes it really easy to get into those back stitches. And we're going to do this exact same thing over and over and over. So we're going to work the front needle, and then we're going to work the back needle, and then we're going to come back to and work the front needle and back to the back needle. And what we're going to do is work 2 stitches on the front needle and then 2 stitches on the back needle. And the reason for that is if you think about the way that the yarn actually goes through stitches, it actually takes 2 moves of yarn to make a complete stitch. The first one is a knit in, and the second is a purl out. And so we're going to be doing different combinations of that in the front and the back in order to make stitches that look exactly like stockinette. So we're going to start by going into our first stitch on our front needle knitwise. And we're going to knit that stitch off the needle. So we're just going to take that off the needle. And then we're going to go into our second stitch purlwise and leave that stitch on. So I'll refer to that move as knit off, purl on. You can do that in one move, as you'll see here momentarily. And then we're going to move to the back needle, and we're going to do the exact opposite of that. So we're going to purl off the first stitch, and then we're going to knit on the back stitch. So we're going to go into the stitch purlwise, and then we're going to pull it, oops, my camera's flopping about here. Then we're going to pull it off the needle, and then we're going to tighten that stitch. And then we're going to go into the second stitch on that back needle knitwise, and we're going to leave it on the needle. So we're going to purl off, knit on. And we're just going to repeat that motion all the way across this toe. So on the front needle, you're going to knit off, purl on, and then you're going to move to the back needle and you're going to purl off, knit on. The trick to really getting a beautiful Kitchener stitch is making sure that right here, underneath these stitches, you're matching your gauge tension that you've had in the rest of the sock. So you don't want them too tight, but you really don't want them too loose. So make sure that you are tugging those a little bit as you're moving from the front needle to the back needle, and kind of just keep an eye out here as we go. So we're going to knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on, knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on, knit off, come on, purl on, purl off, knit on. And now we're down to our last stitch. And we're just going to slip our needles out. Traditionally, if we were working the tails on either side, or the setup stitch on either side, we would do one more stitch in that back end, but it would make that tail. So this gives us a nice finished toe. And as you can see, whenever you pull that forward, it looks like we just knitted it together, but we actually grafted it. And then in order to finish off this last stitch right over here that's a little bit loose, I usually go right in behind and wherever it'll tighten that stitch up a little bit. So you can see it's kind of flopping off to this side, so I want to pull it back the other way. And that's where I run my needle back down into the sock, and then I'll just weave in that end on the inside. And then you'll just work the second sock exactly the same as you've worked the first sock. And I really am pleased that you had this pattern, and I hope you enjoy knitting daisy chain socks.